You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Homefield Apparel.
I guess I should unmute myself first. There we go. That's better. Welcome back to CrimsonCast. Both Galen Clavius, Kyle Caulfield joining you as
we get the dance mix open.
You like that? Yeah.
Extended dance mix, yeah.
People have said that the CrimsonCast theme is a banger. So
royalty free on iTunes 17 years ago. Open for anybody. It was
wild.
Just there.
I wonder whatever happened. I don't even remember the guy's name. But yeah, it's
like when Scorsese got Clapton Layla for Goodfellas. Like that song had been sitting there. I just listened to the rewatchables with Wayne's World. Like Bohemian Rhapsody had been there. Like this song was out there on iTunes for any caller daddy could have had this as their song.
Yeah. I bet they're probably torn up about that right now. But we're back. We're good. We're talking last day of February, believe it or not. Beautiful day down here in Bloomington. The grapes are growing in Scott's backyard vineyard up there. Did you get some golf in this morning, Scott? Everybody wants to know.
It's so funny. I was actually talking. I wanted to. The course nearby, Woodwind, opened up. It's walking only, but they don't open till noon. So I was trying to see, can I get 9 in, but it's walking. I was like, I'm doing a podcast at 2:00. So, no, literally, that was a discussion this morning about playing some golf. I'm going on a guys golf trip next weekend to Tampa. Me and 4 of my high school buddies. I'm very excited.
Everybody wants to know when the next polo sesh is for you, though.
They do. Some of my neighbors have actually gone to the Westfield Polo, and they've been like, "It's kind of fun. You guys should go." I know these are jokes, but they're cutting real close, man.
As we've said, Scott is the other half. Okay, like it's a fascinating spot to be. But I'm glad you're having such leisure. This is wonderful. I particularly for those who are not watching. Scott wore his ascot today. It was really a nice touch. So
if I wasn't an IU basketball fan, life would just be amazing. Like everything else would just be winning on all other accounts.
Perhaps sunshine is just over the horizon with IU basketball. Yes. We'll see. A lot of things have not happened over the last week since we last talked. But
nothing will happen next week.
We're moving into March. I'll be surprised if we get out of March without a new basketball coach.
Oh, really?
I won't be shocked.
Okay, because I picked April 2nd. I have a bet with some friends. We bet who's going to be the coach, and we bet the date. I picked April 2nd.
I kind of like this. Maybe we should organize a CrimsonCast version of this. It's kind of like the Jerome, but for IU basketball coaching searches.
Oh yeah, no. On one other pod, I got to talk through. I know we're limited on time. This one, I have 3 of my buddies. We have a draft where we did a snake draft of candidates for the job. We did it last time with the Woodson hire. Nobody got. We did 5 rounds. Nobody picked Woodson. Just a heads up. And this year, the joke was this year, it's my buddy Robert and Ben. We're doing a keeper league, so just in case there's future hires. And so we I picked like Drew Valentine with my last pick, just because I don't know, man. Maybe in 5 years we'll be at this again. But at some point, I will talk through all the picks that were made, but we also added a pick for the date, and I went April 2nd because I'm just like, there's no way they can announce it on April 1st.
So that is official sister of CrimsonCast, Olivia Clavio's birthday, April 2nd, and famously, our father had to instruct her in the womb not to be born on March 30th of 1981. Because that was the national championship game, and she was very nice and waited the extra 2 days. So not only was the game played, but there was some time for celebration afterwards before they had to go to the hospital. There you go. Anyway, let's move on. We are brought to you by Homefield Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs, and again, lovely stuff across the board as Homefield continues to deliver the things IU fans are looking for. If you haven't been over there, just go to Homefield Apparel, search Indiana. You're going to find a ton of stuff, probably more than any other school. I haven't done the tally in a while, but I think it's probably close. The other day, Scott busted out my little 500 bomber jacket, the black with the big flag display on the back. That thing is lovely. I love it.
They have more racing stuff coming too. It's got the email. They have like a Dale Earnhardt thing. But no, you're right. Like we are on home field what the Oregon football team is on NCAA 25. Yes. Like just a plethora of stuff. Whereas like some schools, like I'm playing a lot lately. I played Texas, and it's just like they have white and burnt orange, and that's all you got. But Indiana has nothing but options on home field.
Use the code HOME23, get 15% off your first order. Again, homefieldapparel.com, proud presenting sponsor of the Back Home Network. We also would like to encourage everybody to go to YouTube, search Back Home Network, join the over 7,100 folks that are subscribed there. Join us on Substack. It's free. You get podcasts delivered right to your inbox. Occasionally, you'll get an extra podcast if you do the paid subscription option, which you're not required to do. $5 a month, $50 a year, help financially support the podcast, keep the lights on, and what have you. So, Scott, before we dive into the coaching candidates part 3, let's talk a little bit about the game Indiana played a couple of nights ago. I was in the building, Indiana, Penn State. It was a predictably closer game than I think perhaps outside forces might have anticipated. Indiana, again, struggled quite a bit defensively in this game. And it was a game that was in doubt until about the last 6 minutes. And then Indiana figured out a way to make the plays and come away with the victory. And Scott, I mean, it's largely because Mike Woodson is just not playing certain players very much right now. He's really coalesced around this core of Trey Galloway, who's really picked it up lately, and I think deserves a ton of credit for, coming back from what was a disappointing first part of the season, alongside Anthony Leal, who's been getting a ton of minutes lately, Luke Goody, who's been a dynamo offensively for this team, Miles Rice, who, while he's had a very uneven year, he's really kind of picked himself up and made himself a guy you have to have on the floor, especially defensively. And then either Malik Renew or Umar Ballo. It was Ballo this time because Malik had what I've heard was some kind of allergic reaction that kept him out of that game. Ballo played amazing in that game, was really a key element, and that's really all that they've been playing. Though they've gotten a little bit out of Kanan Carlisle. He didn't have a very good game against Purdue, but he did have a pretty good game against Penn State. 5 points all in a row and 2 rebounds, and really kind of gave Indiana a shot in the arm when they needed it. I don't know if this is sustainable. This is a really short lineup. It's basically 6.5 players. We haven't seen Bryson Tucker in a while. Mackenzie Mbako has contributed a little bit in early stages of games, but now, even though he played 28 minutes against Penn State, I was shocked when I saw that he had played that many minutes because he was basically not on the floor for the second part of the second half. Only played 9 against Purdue, only played 13 in that game at Michigan State, largely, I think, because of a lack of defensive effort more than anything else. I give Woodson credit for coalescing around this lineup because I think it's been a big reason why Indiana's won 3 out of their last 4. It's probably not sustainable for that much longer, especially as we get into periods where Indiana's playing games in a tighter cluster. But it now really makes me wonder, if this had been the approach earlier, and if you had more buy-in, and this was really, how Indiana had committed to playing from the beginning, are we even sitting here talking about a coaching change, or, is the season good enough that we're moving forward? It's just it's a real interesting thing to think about.
It is. That's a great question. I'm not sure if it's just the playing time, but I mean, you're right. It is. Woodson is kind of down to we're playing 6.5 guys every game, and Mbako just took the Renew minutes in this Penn State game. I would say that, it's easy to do when you're coming off of 9 days between UCLA and Purdue, and then you have back-to-back home games with a 3-day gap. It's going to be interesting. I think we're going to start to stress test this. I mean, we're going to hear the end of the season really quick. Yeah. But you have 2 games, in 3 days, a lot of flying, going to Washington and then Oregon, and then you come back 4 days later to play a game against Ohio State. And then you play in the Big Ten tournament, which I'm not even sure I've seen the bracket. But I'm assuming it's just, you make it on Tuesday or Wednesday, and then you just play every single day. And then if you make any kind of tournament, you're doing, a game every 2 days and then going to a new site. So all of that said, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But I think we're going to find out really quick. The thing that I found funny again with the Penn State game is the game is definitely in the balance, and then Indiana goes on a 12-2 run with about 5 minutes to go. Again, another game where we get the little run icon in the Ken Palm score chart. Just that has to happen in an IU game. We also gave up a 10-0 run to Penn State in the middle of the first half. So again, this is a team of runs. It's just a matter of when's the run's going to happen, and can we have the bigger run, and can we have more runs than the other team gets runs on us?
Yeah, it was, look, it was a weird vibe in there. It was a weird game. It was, the Purdue game was such a cool experience for so many of the people that were in there because it was a really like vibrant atmosphere.
Yeah.
Indiana played really hard. I mean, it was a lot of like uncomfortable, oh boy, here we go again kind of feeling in the crowd until Indiana went on that 12-0 run. I mean, at that point, it was 67-65. There were 8 minutes left in the game. It really looked like this was going to be one that got away from IU and that was going to really hurt their tournament hopes. And then they really took control from there. And even though Penn State got back into it a little bit at the end, I think the closest Penn State ever got was 5 the rest of the way. And that, I mean, I really take my hat off to the guys that played and especially Trey Galloway, who hit those clutch threes down the stretch. Luke Goody, who hit some great free throws. I mean, there were just a lot of guys who made good individual plays. Omar Ballo had a great rebound that kept that last big, like, high leverage possession alive. But yeah, I mean, the runs, it's just who this team is. This team's got the talent to go on, 10-point run, 12-point run, or 28-3 run, as we saw against Purdue. But it's also, unless it's focused and really drilled and, doing what it needs to do, it's also able to give up a 10-0 run like they did earlier in the game against Penn State. So
the thing that I would say with the shorter lineups is, as this has been happening, Woodson had been able to keep, I'm just focusing on Ballo just because for a while there he was running some really high minute totals. He was able to do that while keeping Ballo at kind of a 22 to 26 minute a game. Against Penn State, Ballo has 36 minutes. And we've seen, there was that stretch from, the Ohio State home game to the Purdue road game where Ballo was 40 minutes, 36, 39, 35. And then his play fell off a cliff for 2 or 3 games. You can't run him in the 35 plus minutes for multiple games in a row. So that's what I'm going to be looking for the next couple of games is how is Woodson going to do of these lineups, tighter rotations with also basically one of the guys you got to keep kind of at 22 minutes a game.
Yeah, I'm curious about that as well, especially with the road trip.
Yeah.
So you got a game on Saturday, you got a game on Tuesday, you got a big game on Saturday.
But this is a better road trip than the teams that go to play. It seems like everyone either plays UCLA or USC, or you get the Washington, Oregon one. It seems like the Washington, Oregon teams do a little bit better.
It kind of depends. It's very. I will say it has been very hit or miss. I mean, if you look at, like, for instance, Minnesota went out and swept LA. They beat USC by 3. They beat UCLA by 3, and then they turned around and lost at home to Penn State and Northwestern. This league makes no sense. I will say that.
Yeah.
But you look at the teams that have made the 2-parter road trip, and it's not everybody, but it's been kind of a mixed bag. I mean, Michigan State went out and lost the 2 LA games back to back, and then has come back and put a tremendous run on. Michigan, I don't think went out there. It's just been very. Actually, Michigan went to USC and UCLA as well, so it is a little bit uneven in terms of all of that. Purdue went out and beat both Washington and Oregon by a pretty decent margin. I think they beat Washington by 11 and Oregon by 7. So we know it can be done. It's just going to be interesting to see which IU team shows up in both of those games.
When you look at the bracket matrix, we're popping as an 11 or a 12 seed right now. So, it's as we've talked about, our tournament hopes were never done. It's that game against Ohio State. Ohio State's in a very similar spot that we are. That's going to be a really key game when we get to that point.
Yeah, it's going to be really fascinating in terms of the way that the tournament stuff goes. In that right now, I was talking with somebody about this earlier. It's hard to conceive that Indiana is going to be in the tournament, but they have a better chance to be in the tournament than out of the tournament right now. And that does not really jibe with the way that we've thought about the season up to this point. And it doesn't make a lot of sense just when you look at it on paper, except that, IU is 17-11. If they can go 2-1 in the remaining part of the schedule, they'll be 10-10. And you look at their results, and they won at Ohio State. That's a really good win. They won at Michigan State. Very few teams have a win as good as that in the whole country.
Yeah,
and they beat Purdue at home. And
bad losses,
they don't have any bad losses. I mean, that's the thing. The worst loss in the
losses.
Yeah, if you want to look up good loss in the dictionary, you see the little pitchfork next to it.
Right.
The worst loss Indiana has all season is at Iowa, and that was a bad loss in terms of like it was aesthetically ugly. But Iowa, that's a top 75 team, so it's not really that damaging. So the Washington game is really important because that would be the worst loss of the season, and it would be a terrible time to pick up such a loss. The other two, I think they need to split Oregon and Ohio.
It has the feeling of like something that could happen, which what we see with this team. Yeah.
But I could also see them losing at Washington and then sweeping Oregon and Ohio State. And then it's like, well, now you got a road win against Oregon. And that becomes like, now you got another great win that most teams don't have. So this is where it's, who knows at this point. Just strap in and get ready for the ride. And keep in mind that, there's a lot of other teams that also have to win in order to get into the tournament. And I'm going to do a whole bracket show next week. I haven't done one yet because it's just been kind of crazy just trying to keep track of what's going on with all this. But we'll walk through all the teams that are in competition with Indiana. We can kind of talk through what exactly it's looking like and where Indiana's results lie with others. The other thing to keep in mind is like there's going to be bid stealers, teams that win conference tournaments that aren't supposed to. And you hate being in the category where that affects you, but that's exactly where Indiana's at right now. And that's going to be a challenge that we got to just consider as we move forward.
Just a 2-minute question on this, because I've had a couple of friends, I think they're just gaslighting me about this, but it's like the question of, all right, Indiana makes a tournament. How far do they have to go before you reconsider bringing back Woodson? I'm just curious. I'm going to rephrase the question. If they make the tournament, at what point us advancing far is that's a different discussion. Let's just say pick a round where it suddenly becomes an awkward discussion about how we're still like they make the Final Four. It's going to be an odd, like, wow, we're actually going to do this. But where would you say that becomes an odd discussion point that we're still going to keep which I think is what you need to do. But
I was talking with friends of the pod, Mark Cady and Chris Williams yesterday and Matt Blaska, and this came up in conversation. We were discussing it, and my response to them is what I'll say to you, which is at the beginning of the year when we were talking about this IU team, who was, if you'll recall, picked second to win the Big Ten, we asked at that point, is making a Sweet 16 enough to consider keeping Mike Woodson? Backdooring your way to some degree into the NCAA tournament and winning a couple of games, I don't think changes the problems that we've had within the course of the season overall, and why a decision was made so early to move on from Woodson. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of conversation and question about if the IU makes the Sweet 16, for instance, if they make the NCAA. I don't think they're going to. But
what if they make a Davis style run? Like they just the bracket breaks, they win a key game in the Sweet 16 and they're in the national championship game.
I mean, I don't know. It's almost impossible to entertain that as a thought process because I mean you might as well ask, like, what if the tournament gets canceled? Then what? Like it's right. there's all kinds of those things where it's hard to really put that in. Look, here's the thing. The one thing I'll say on this is a lot of people, those questions first started popping up not when Indiana beat Purdue, but when Indiana beat Penn State. And I just would like to remind everybody that I was thrilled that Indiana beat Penn State. I was thrilled that they've coalesced around a lineup that's working hard. Penn State is 17th in the Big Ten right now. Penn State had won one road game the entire year, and it was at Minnesota 3 days before they played Indiana on the road. I'm all for giving IU its flowers. I don't think that we need to be having the conversation about, well, gosh, if we win 4 games in the NCAA tournament at this point, since it's not even guaranteed he's going to get in. So I think we push that off to the side for now, and we can revisit.
I agree. It's like paying taxes on winning the lottery. Like, that theoretically sucks, but you also won the lottery. Like, if we're in the Final Four, that's a weird conversation I'd be happy to have.
Let's win the Big Ten tournament first and then see what happens.
Let's win a game in the Big Ten tournament.
Let's win one game in the Big Ten tournament. That would be ideal.
All right. On that, let's talk about other coaches.
Yeah. So let's get to the other coach discussion.
I'm calling this group, so I know we got to name. Well, we don't have to, but I'm naming the groups. All of these guys are I'm 46, you're 45. They're kind of in our age range. Growing up, not millennials. So I'm calling this the Friendster group. Friendster or MySpace, because they're a little bit before, they were around. They're kind of our age. So we're going, this is the Friendster group.
The 6 Degrees group, right?
Yeah.
You remember that one, right? Yes. Friendster. God. That's yeah. Okay. I like it. This is a relatively, there's enough Gen X DNA in this group that, maybe we should call them like the singles group or
Reality Bites.
Reality Bites. This says that
singles. Yeah.
The Reality Bites group. I love it. All right. So we have been trying to cordon off groups of 4. We're going to have more of these. We've done 8 so far. And if you have missed those, go back and listen to those podcasts.
Do you think when we're done with this, we will have done our new coach?
Yes, okay. I do. And in fact, there's big names we haven't hit. We're going to hit one that everybody talks about in this group. There's big names we haven't touched thus far that we are planning on doing. And we're trying to meter this out because we've got a long way to go, obviously, still in this coaching search, probably another month. Or if you're Scott, we've got a month. We got like 5 weeks instead of 4.
Right.
So let's start with a name I don't really think is a serious candidate, but I keep seeing him popping up on job boards. And I don't for the life of me understand why. He coaches in the Big Ten. He's been in the Big Ten for longer than you might think. And other than being, I guess, a relatively good-looking guy, I really don't understand why people keep bringing him up. But it's Chris Collins at Northwestern. So Chris Collins, he's 51 years. He's going to be 51 years old at the start of the upcoming college basketball season, which is younger than I would have anticipated. A relatively young guy. Makes $2.8 million a year. Does not have a buyout at Northwestern. At least from all evidence that I can find, they got rid of the buyout in his last contract extension.
Maybe Cronin can give him some of his. Here's $2 million of my buyout.
There you go. Yeah. Let's pool our buyout and see what happens. 507 win percentage for his career, which 192 and 187 is his totals. 3-3 in the NCAA tournament. Was Big Ten Coach of the Year in 2023. In his time in the Big Ten, and this is the only place he's ever coached as a head coach, he is 84 and 140 in Big Ten play, which is a .375 win percentage, which if he did get hired, that would be a great homage to the history of Indiana football, because that's about their winning percentage, I think, overall in conference play. Chris Collins, his high water marks have come somewhat recently. Of course, if you'll all recall, in 2022, they finished tied for second in the Big Ten. With Indiana, sorry, in 2023, tied for second with Indiana. And, if you look at his history, a lot of the reason why he gets mentioned is because of the pedigree of him having been a Coach K assistant for many years. He's obviously got the Duke connection there. I'm going to call his KenPom page up so we can look at it together. But, he's been coaching at Northwestern since 2014. And Scott, I'm just not seeing a lot here to really get excited about, as he's at Northwestern, tough place to win, at least we always hear, and yet it feels like every other tough place to win has had the ability to be more consistent with their winning than has been at Northwestern. And while there is no argument that Chris Collins has been the best coach Northwestern's had, maybe ever, I still don't see a lot there that would make me think, God, this is a guy I really would like to get as the head coach of Indiana.
I mean, he's been there. He's only had 3 seasons in the Big Ten with double-digit wins, a lot of single-digit wins. Here's what I was noticing on the page. Well, I would say, because he's being mentioned for the job, I would say he's got a great agent, but he doesn't have a buyout. So maybe he doesn't have a good. Maybe he doesn't have a great agent, or he has a great new agent. I don't want to keep harping on this, but I will bring this up on all the candidates today. I always go back on the KenPom looking at the rank in adjusted offense and adjusted defense, because we continue to say, normally if you have a team that's in the top 25 in both of those categories, you have a team that has the hallmarks of a team that could go to the Final Four. I was looking at it, and this is another weird marker point, but he's never had a team in the top 10 of adjusted offense or adjusted defense ever in his career. And then I started looking just through his KenPom page. Has he been in the top 10 in the country in anything? And he has. There's little pockets of 1 year they were top in turnover percentage. They were in the top 7 or 8. But my point is, you go back and look at, and I didn't do a deep dive, but you look at Tom Crean when he was at Marquette. 2 years he had an offense that was in the top 10 in the country. Coaches that are going to be taking a job like Indiana, I would hope that at some point maybe if you don't have tournament success, you have a team that is just elite at something, or you've shown over the course of this long in one place, what do we call it before? Like, hot green or like a green streak, like something that just shows like you have figured out something. For Chris Collins, maybe it's offensive turnover percentage. They're very high in not turning the ball over on offense. It's just not, there's not enough. There's nothing that says like he is great at making his teams elite at this.
Yeah, no, I mean, his teams don't shoot the ball well. His teams, they've had times when they've defended well, but it's generally been at the expense of their offense. There's not a lot there that sticks out statistically. And
the good news is when his tournament results, he's never really lost he's never had like a loss where he's losing to a lower seed. But that's because he's always been a 7, 8, or a 9 seed, right, where in the second round you get shellacked by the 1 or the 2, which, that was like your and mine college experience with the IU Hoosiers with Bob Knight. You're always stuck in that 8-9 game, which sucks. So I don't know why he's being mentioned.
I know. Well, he got mentioned in 2017 because if you'll recall, like that was the first time he'd taken Northwestern to the tournament. He'd been there 4 years. It's like, wow, there's a great upward trajectory. And that was famously like Julia Louis-Dreyfus's like kid or nephew was on the team, and they won their first game, and then they proceeded to have 4 straight losing seasons overall and 5 straight losing seasons in the conference. And you go back and look at the articles from like March of 2022, and it's like, well, they're bringing Chris Collins back mostly because they can't afford to fire him. Like that was literally the rationale in the articles. It had nothing to do with, well, we really believe in the Chris Collins experiment. Now, to his credit, they have been better. They were better in 23. They were better in 24. And it's hard to judge this season particularly strongly because they lose Brooks Barnheiser, in the middle of the season. They got kind of snake bit by injuries. They're still 6-11 in the conference. But man, it's just like if this is another one of those candidates where it's like, if this is who they end up with, either someone like really, really wanted a Coach K assistant as the head coach at IU, or Indiana got turned down by all of the other good candidates, and so they've settled for this. The
only good thing he could bring is the fireworks that go off behind the basket while other teams are still shooting that can make the ball go out. That would be fun.
Or bring the officials that refuse to call push-offs on his own team when they're playing Indiana. Like if we could import that. Like if we get the whatever boo-booey magic they had in terms of official calls, I would consider it at least.
Or can we also just take away the Northwestern's no longer Chicago's Big Ten team? Just Indiana becomes Chicago's Big Ten team.
I have been advocating that for years. We have a far greater claim to that than they do. Anyway, I don't think
my number would be like I'd be in the 30s. I'd be like a 32, just because Indiana has in the last 10 years. Indiana's made 3 tournaments.
Yeah.
Chris Collins has made 3 tournaments in 10 years. Like this is I don't know what you're doing, and it would look like everybody turns you down.
I would be at a 20. Like I would be more excited for Brad Brownell.
Coach K.
You'd take Coach K today. Yeah. I would much rather have Brad Brownell than have Chris Collins.
Yeah. And even if Collins is going to bring K back as an assistant, I'd be more interested.
So what if he brought Johnny Dawkins too? And Steve Wojciechowski, like just get the whole band back together.
And Jay Billis takes over Fisher's job, and
there you go. Let's move to our second candidate, also a private school coach, much younger, Mark Byington, whose name has gotten bandied about. There was what appears to be a very erroneous story that was floated on social media that somehow Curt Cignetti, having worked with Byington when Byington was the head coach at James Madison, that he was like advocating to Dolson that he needed to hire him. And then, of course, hilariously, Cignetti got on Twitter, was like, nope, that's not accurate. I love that. That's great. Cignetti is so awesome.
Yeah.
But when I look at Byington, he's an interesting case. One thing I did hear yesterday, I was listening to Field of 68 with Jeff Goodman and with Robbie Hummel. And Goodman mentioned that Byington's buyout is pretty large, like $12 million. He just got there.
Wow.
You look at his stats. He's 49. He's going to be 49 at the start of the upcoming season. 237 and 142 overall, 625 win percentage. Has had kind of an interesting pathway through his career. He started off a while ago, like even for being close to 50. He's been in the game for quite a while. He was at Georgia Southern and led them from the SoCon to the Sun Belt, was there for like 7 seasons, then moved to James Madison, led them out of the Colonial and into the Sun Belt. He's like a Sun Belt. I don't know if that means Indiana would go in the Sun Belt or if that's where Vanderbilt might be headed there. I'm not totally sure. But, he's had some success. And certainly he got hired at Vanderbilt largely because he took James Madison from, in the post-COVID year, a 15-14 record and a 227 mark in KenPom, all the way up to not just being a tournament invite and a 12 seed as a Sun Belt team, but a team that won the first game in the tournament, won 32 games that year. He's an interesting candidate, but again, Scott, when we talk about him, he's done really well at Vanderbilt. He's in his first season. It's an interesting idea, but he's pretty far behind a lot of the other candidates that would be in the mix. Just looking at what he's done overall, there's a little bit of a footprint there, but only one NCAA tournament appearance throughout the course of his career as a head coach.
Yeah, you got to be able to make the tournament once or twice at a school, or it has to be something where you make it and the team is so good, like that team at James Madison that went 32-4. They were 72nd in offense and 74th on defense, ranking wise. That's a team that is good, but is not not doing anything special. This is the one where you look around. There's only one year they ever did anything that was in the top 10 in the country, and that was last year's James Madison team. They were 5th in the country at 3-point defensive. At defense on 3-point shots. So you figure, all right, we're going to bring this to Vanderbilt and we're going to move this over. Nope. At Vanderbilt, they are the worst team in the country
among them.
Damn near 344th, giving up 37% from 3-point line. Sounds like something we're really good at here at IU. We could definitely do that. It looks, I don't want to harp on this one too much, but it looks like somebody who's okay and having some, mid-level success, but there's no evidence in the numbers, in the records, in the tournament success that this is somebody who can take a team and really do something elite at some facet of the basketball game. It looks like somebody who's able to kind of be an average coach, and it seems like a great coach for a place like Vanderbilt.
It does. Well, and maybe he'll grow into something more than that. And I am impressed. His offense this year is far better than any offense he's coached so far this year. They're 21st in the country in adjusted offensive efficiency.
And going 7-8 at Vanderbilt in this year's SEC is nothing to sneeze at.
No. I mean, they've had a good year. I mean, you look down the list of what they've done. They beat Tennessee. They beat Kentucky. They beat Texas. They beat Texas A&M on the road the other day. That's a big win. I mean, there's a bunch of really good results, and it's not, I'm not throwing shade at Mark Byington by any means. I will say though that other than playing fast and doing a pretty good job of limiting turnovers, there's not a lot, as you said, that really sticks out on his resume as being important and meaningful in terms of, hey, this is clearly the next candidate for the IU job. I don't see that in what's out there. So, again, I think this is one of those names that gets tossed around because he's having a good season. He's got a very loose tie to IU in that he was at James Madison, same time Curt Cignetti was. But beyond that, there's not really a good argument to be made here. And especially if he's got a $12 million buyout.
Like $12 million is a lot to pay for those results.
Lot to pay.
Whereas Cronin's 15, but he's just tournament.
Right. No, that's the thing. I mean, Cronin's at a significantly higher level. So that's what I would say there. I would be intrigued if they decided this is the guy we wanted. Like there would have to be something behind the scenes where it'd be like, whoa, baby. But I'd be like, okay, you need to show me what that is, like real fast to get excited. In this, I mean, I'd be about the same level as Brownell in terms of excitement. So I'd be around like the 25 to 30 range. But again, it would feel like settling more than anything else.
I agree with all that. I'd be in the 32 to 35 range. But the only thing that would make me happy is if it came out, it's like, well, as part of Cignetti's extension, he demanded that we hire the James Madison basketball coach. Like, okay,
sure.
If it makes Cignetti happy and that's what kept him on football, like, sure, this looks great. I love those KenPom numbers.
Yeah, it's there's certain things you'll allow, as a payment for, hey, you got us to 11-1 in football.
Yep.
Yes, we'll let you hire the basketball coach. That's not happening here, though. And that's funny. Before we go on, we were asked by one of our Twitter followers.
Love this question.
We've been doing this 0 to 100 scale in terms of our excitement on hires. One of us, probably you, Scott, you have a little more free time than me. You just go back and actually write down what our actual answers were.
Okay.
So that we can have that moving forward. But they asked us what would have been our 0 to 100 excitement ratings on all the coaches since night that got hired. I'm going to let you go first on this. So we've got Davis, we've got Samson, we've got Tom Crean, we've got Archie Miller, and we've got Mike Woodson. So we got five people. We need a 0 to 100 number of what you would have been at the time, not knowing what happens, but at the time, how excited would you have been for that hire, given what we knew about those candidates at the time?
When is the Davis hire? Because he was interim and then
let's say when he got hired full time. So March of 2001, after that 4-seed year that he had for the interim.
Yeah. God, I was still so young and dumb at that point. But my dad and I.
Well, I mean, imagine now.
My dad and I flew to that game to watch us lose to Kent State. It was just. It was wild. We flew TWA. The seats were facing, and we're in the back, like facing. You had the table in the middle. I don't know what was going on. We stopped in St. Louis, flew TWA. We get there, and then it's like a Thursday or Friday game. It was obviously the first game. Like we had hotels till through Sunday, and then it's just we get our smoked by Kent State.
Yeah.
I was probably like a 73 with Davis, just because I think I was buying into the narrative of like, all right, this guy's part of was an assistant, like he's part of the lineage. I was more bummed after we lost that Kent State game, but that 4 seed was the highest seed line we had gotten in like 8 or 9 years at that point. It had been a while since we were a protected seed. And then, it quickly changed. The next year, I probably would have been like an 84 because I'm like, took him to the title game. Like he felt like it was a breath of fresh air. I wasn't thinking about how much we were giving up by not having a real search at that point. No. So if I was doing it now, I'd probably be like a 64. But I think at the time I was like in probably the mid 70s.
Yeah, I was not terribly excited about the hire. I felt it was settling. It felt at that point, keep in mind that like there was not a real commitment to winning on the part of the IU administration. So I would have been probably closer at about a 45. The season was fine. I mean, there were some great moments that season, but it just didn't feel like an inspired hire, especially with some of the names that were thrown around at the time. Remember, Rick Pitino's name was getting mentioned. This was pre-baggage Steve Alford. This was before the Pierce and all of that. So he was still considered to be somebody that, was in demand, and everybody kind of assumed he was going to get the job. There were other names. Bobby Kremen's name, I remember being mentioned during that time period. So to just be like, yeah, we're going to go with the interim guy who didn't have any other prior experience. So I would have been around a 45, I think. Let's go Kelvin Samson. What would have been your reaction for that one?
Are we like now, if the hire happened now, or like
I'm saying at the time?
At the time,
what was your level of excitement?
I was pretty excited. I mean, he had taken a team to a Final Four. It's really tough to parse now, knowing how quickly he just did the same show of cause stuff that he was doing then. It felt like everyone said all the right things. Like he knows what he did wrong. He's not going to do that here. We have a great plan in place. And then very quickly he got a team together and put it together. I would say like mid to high 70s, like probably like a 76 or 77, because it felt like an interesting hire and somebody who had a really good pedigree.
I was really mixed on this one. I was about a 55 or 60. I remember having a conversation with my dad about this because, I was still watching IU basketball, but I was also watching Texas Tech. I was really interested with the Bob Knight experiment down there. I was going on. So I saw a ton of Big 12 games, saw a bunch of Oklahoma, always admired the way they played, but I knew all the problems that they were having at Oklahoma and the fact that he'd applied for the Arizona State job. And then all of a sudden he ends up with the Indiana job. And it's like, well, they were chasing this guy out of Norman. Why are we hiring him? And that was not knowing all of the backstory at that point about how the hire had gone. And so
what was also for me is like, I that was a time that I thought Alford made sense. Right? Yeah. It just like, that was what, coming off a 25-9 year at Iowa, I think 2006 or 2007, like he was still doing well at Iowa. It felt like to me, that was the time I was like, I think I was disappointed they didn't go with Alford because it felt like that would have been a cool hire at that point.
let's go to Tom Crean, only 2 years later. So Crean gets hired.
We started the podcast. Like, this is about the time you and I start. We could probably go back and listen to the archives. Given everything that had happened and the way that we self-flagellated ourselves, I would say I was in like the low 80s, like 82, 83, only because this is a guy who had Final Four experience, had one of the most important players in the NBA in his pedigree, seemed like a young, energetic coach who wanted to be there. And, for those who don't remember, that was a really dark period where there was a lot like, why would anybody want this job? And there was a lot of discussion of like, maybe no one would take that job. Looking back, there was a lot of people who would have taken the job,
right?
And it probably wasn't as we felt, but that was a moment where it did feel really dire. There was a moment where it's like, are we getting Dan Dockich as our coach? Like, he's really advocating for it. So I would be high because it felt really good. And after the press conference, Crean won that press conference. You're like, damn, this guy really wants to be here. So yeah, it's like 83, 84.
Yeah, no, I was excited. I mean, it seemed like a good hire. Like, I mean, there were some questions a little bit about, there were a couple of whispers about how effective of a coach he was going to be at the highest level, but he was enthusiastic. He had been to a Final Four within the previous 4 years, played in a very tough Big East. Seemed like a really good hire. And so yeah, I was right up there in that range. Archie Miller. I'll let me go on this one first. I was very excited about the Archie Miller hire because, again, as we've talked about many times on the show, seemed like a dynamite hire. Everybody said that was the best hire in the cycle. I still can clearly remember in that 2017 tournament watching Wichita State and Dayton in the first round and thinking, God, I'd love either of these coaches. Look how hard their teams play. So, obviously we saw what happened afterwards, and there were a lot of failings as a result. But on paper, as we've said many times, it felt like a great process that led to a great result that ended up being a terrible result. But it wasn't because of the process. So yeah, it was. I'll say 85 on that one.
I'll give you my number with a story. My wife and I started a scholarship at the School of Education around this time. And it was a fun process. If you haven't done it, I would venture to do it. It's a fun process. It's very cool. It's now been funded. We worked with the School of Education. They were fantastic to work with. And as part of that, they used us for an advertisement in the IU Alumni Magazine. And so when we got the IU Alumni Magazine, it was the magazine with the cover of Archie Miller on the cover, holding the ball, like Assembly Hall on his back. I got it framed with that cutout with a picture of us and our scholarship. So excited. And I thought this is going to be effing awesome because now we have our next coach for 20 years. I'm going to put this in the basement. And what a great cover of IU alumni to have there. It has since moved to the corner of the basement, kind of way behind a wall. I won't get rid of the frame, but like I might at some point put a poster with a new face on it. I was the same thing. I've said it over and over again. Part of me was like Holtman was interesting because like there were so many good guys coming out of Butler over and over again. But I've said it a bunch of times. I will say it again. You could argue him or Holtman, but it's kind of doesn't matter. He was the number one hire that offseason. He was the best coach available that offseason. I was probably a 93.
And then finally, Mike Woodson. I was at about a 50. It was very similar to how I felt about the Kelvin Samson hire for completely opposite reasons. Like I was like, oh, great, an IU guy will understand the program. But I think everybody was kind of like, this is what they landed on. And now, of course, we've got some additional context on that. But I was not sad that Woodson got hired. I was more confused. And that is kind of where we're at with everything still. I think right now I'm still very confused. How about you?
Yeah, I was probably like in the same boat, maybe a 61. I was trying. I remember listening to Assembly Call. Can't wait to talk to you. Like what? It definitely felt like we struck out, and it felt like that we did kind of the easy pick. And again, I will joke. Me and my buddies Robert and Ben, we did I'm looking at the list right now, a coaching bet pick for that. I'll be real quick. These are the names that we picked in 5 rounds of picking. For when we hired Woodson. Our bets were Beeline, Mata, which ended up being there, Chris Beer, Dane Fife, who also kind of was there, Scott Drew, Brad Stevens, Steve Alford, Calbert Cheney, Eric Musselman, Dana Altman, Lawrence Frank, Rick Pitino, Tony Bennett, Bruiser Flint, Bruce Pearl. A lot of those guys, I'd be down. I'm in for going back and redoing it, but it's just, I look at that and I'm like, we had 15, 17 names and Woodson was never on there. That isn't awesome. Yeah. I really went into it I had to talk myself into the, all right, NBA guy, he knows it, alumnus and all that. So like 61, 62.
Yeah. All right, we got to get to the last two candidates. We don't have a whole lot of time. Let's go to the youngest name I think we'll have in this entire search, a guy who's had certainly a checkered experience with the NCAA, Will Wade, currently the coach at McNeese, which used to be McNeese State, formerly the coach at LSU and VCU, ran afoul of NCAA rules violations and got a show cause penalty and got essentially barred from LSU. 699 win percentage, however, 2-4 in the NCAA, 2 Coach of the Year awards, and a guy who, you want to talk about some green streaks on his KenPom page, there's a ton of them.
Yes.
Will Wade has been back in coaching. This is his second year at McNeese. He made the tournament in his first year. Now, McNeese is not that complicated or hard of a place to get to the tournament necessarily, but it's still an accomplishment. He's been in the top 75 at KenPom both years now that he's been there. His teams are entertaining. They're fun. They play entirely different styles from the way that his LSU teams played, who played somewhat differently from how his VCU teams played. Clearly a good basketball mind, but man, this guy comes with his own compartment full of baggage, and it's a name I don't know that we would normally see if IU wasn't in such desperate need of a reset from a program perspective.
I was reading through his Wikipedia page. This again goes to Bob Knight is underrated. Like it is now official. I was reading through his Wikipedia page. Will Wade got his 100th win in 2017. I went back and looked. I'm like, damn, he was 35 years old when he got 100 wins. So I was like, that was like, Knight was young too. No, Knight left Army in 1971 at 31 years old with 102-50 record. But I will say this. I mean, again, Bob Knight underrated. 100 wins at 31 years old. Insane. Will Wade, after 6 years, his record is 109-60, which is very close to where Knight was 102-50. He's put up a lot of wins, and he's shown the ability to coach. To me, the hinge point is, I mean, I know what, I read about what he did at LSU. I know it was, him on FBI tapes, and
it's not just like, oh, he gave players impermissible payments. Like there's bribery, there's all kinds of like actual illegal stuff, not just against the rules stuff. That's a little bit questionable. Not more, it's more than a little bit questionable.
No, you're right. So I mean, it's almost, you have to discuss, like, are we going to discuss him as a coach? Because as a coach, there's a lot of things to like there. The real question is, again, this comes back to what we'll talk about the next two candidates with baggage. Is you look back at Samson, and Samson was a great coach. Samson has shown he's a great coach, but we have history of hiring somebody at Indiana who has some baggage. And the question is, is Indiana going to be okay with that baggage and with some of the controversy that comes around with that? Or the minute that the water gets turned up 1 degree in temperature, are we going to have issues with it? And I think that's the problem, because if you hire a guy like Will Wade, there will be stories. He might get a little in the gray area, whatever that, I don't know what it is now with NIL, but like he might do that. He's shown a history, and unfortunately Indiana has shown a history of not reacting well to that. Right. So Indiana, if they want to go down this road, to me, it's less about his ability to coach. It's more about Indiana's ability to deal with a coach who's going to live in the gray a little bit more than maybe they want or they say they want.
Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, I think a lot of it is perceptional. I mean, there is an argument to be made that one of our network members, Kathy Amos, made to me a few weeks ago, which is, well, if a guy cheated knowingly and willfully and then tried to cover it up, that's not really that might be a character flaw that you don't want to overlook in a head coach. Like, it's one thing to say, well, look, everybody pays players and it's not, it's totally permissible. No, that's true. But going to the level where you're getting show cause penalties slapped on you to the degree that Wade did, it actually was more of a wrist slap than perhaps you might think, given what you heard about Wade. And certainly the rules changes have made a big difference. Again, this is one of those guys that's really hard to adequately evaluate, because the other thing, the flip side here, it's like you look at his performance at LSU and it was good, but it wasn't like dominating. his best season was in 2019. They went to the Sweet 16. They were a 3 seed that year, so they performed to seed expectation. He had a 3-year run where he had amongst the most efficient offenses in the country, and then his last year at LSU had one of the most efficient defenses in the country, but not at the same time. And in fact, his offenses outside of that 2019 team were at the expense of his defenses. So there is a little bit of like feast or famine aspect to him. He's been a lot more consistent in terms of what his teams have done at McNeese. But he's also literally they played a team this year who's listed in KenPom as biblical studies. I'm going to call it up here. Like you said, they beat them 111-57. I don't know which Bible they're studying. I don't know what, but they're listed as biblical studies. And even
it's like one of those when you look at Indiana's football records from 1904, it's like we play the alumni association.
Or you're playing like the Indianapolis Armory. It's like, I'm not sure if we should count that, frankly. You've also got, as we look through here, I mean, they've on a
great band name. They're starting a band at IU, Biblical Studies.
Biblical Studies. Band name. They're on like the 7th longest winning streak in the country right now. They've won, I think, something like 21 of their last 22. But the one thing I'll note is that they're winning a bunch of games against teams that are significantly worse than they are because they're in the Southland Conference. Like the best win they've had since December was against a team that was ranked 176th, and that was Texas A&M Corpus Christi. Now, you can only play the teams that are in your conference, but much like I feel with Ben McCollum, I just think people need to pump the brakes a little bit on the record and maybe focus a little bit more on like who they're beating. So in this case, I don't know.
Played a team Laterno. When I Googled it, Mary Kay Laterno came up before the university.
Yeah. So all of that to say, I don't know what I would think if Will Wade was the hire. I would be tremendously shocked. You want to talk about going entirely outside of what the normal spectrum of coaching and culture would be for IU. This is an example of it. And I just look at it from the perspective of Will Wade might end up being a really good coach who spends a ton of time in college. This is one of those dice rolls. I would love to hear the explanation if it was indeed the hire of why he was the hire, but I have a hard time seeing him being the hire as a result of that. So I would say my excitement level would be like a 40, merely because I'm like, he's clearly done too many good things in his career to discount him, but he also hasn't done enough great things to make him a shoe-in for the IU job. And then you add all the other stuff and it becomes a real issue.
Yeah, I'd be a 50 just because I would be like you, very intrigued, and it would come down to, I think as a basketball coach, I'd be in the 70s or 80s, but I'd be really nervous that in 2 years, Indiana would reverse course the university and say, oh, we don't like all of this. And we'd be kind of doing the 2008 thing all over again. I don't trust Indiana can handle the heat of somebody who has baggage like this.
For those watching on YouTube or Spotify, we just did a complete costume and location change. We had to stop the previous recording due to some time constraints, but we're back, Scott.
It's Oscars weekend, so we're doing different gowns. We're trying a new movie. We're trying to make the best Oscar for best podcast.
I mean, surely we deserve it at this point.
I would agree. I would like to thank the Academy. I'd like to thank my agent.
Anyway,
you, baby.
One more candidate to talk about, a name that gets bandied about quite a bit within certain circles, and a name that's clearly being pushed for the job by agents is Chris Beard. Chris Beard, currently the head coach at Ole Miss, and of course prior to that had a season at Texas, which right at or during or after he was terminated due to a domestic violence arrest, had a decent amount of success at Texas Tech before that, and then of course had started at Arkansas Little Rock in 2012. If you look at Beard by the numbers, what you've got is a coach that's had a laudable amount of on-court success over the course of his time. Looking at the numbers, Beard, who would be 52, so still relatively young at the start of the next basketball season, 695 win percentage, 661 while at Ole Miss, 11-5 in the NCAA tournament, which includes 2 regular season conference titles, 6 tournament appearances, 1 Final Four, 2 Elite Eights, and then 4 seasons with a top 15 KenPom defense. I'm going to call his KenPom page up here. Beard gets talked about quite a bit in relation to the IU job, Scott. And some of it is what's happened on the court with him, obviously. Took Texas Tech to that national title game where they lost in 2019 to Virginia, had the top KenPom defense in the country that year. Went to an Elite Eight the previous year. A tie to Bob Knight was, if anybody watched, that weird reality show that they did with Texas Tech back, in the last couple of years that Knight was at Texas Tech, you've seen Chris Beard in that. But of course, most people know him from what he's done as a head coach since he got to the Division I level in 2016. So, Beard, from the perspective of being a candidate that's had some success, that by itself, I think, has made him a hot name among certain circles. And then for many people, they see the Bob Knight influence, or they see some kind of a seed in that. Beard, about a month ago, kind of out of the blue, drops a Bob Knight reference on a national broadcast. And we've heard quite a bit from reporters, both on and off the record, who have said, like, Beard is being actively and very aggressively pushed for the job. It's clearly a job he wants. But Scott, this is also a gentleman who lost his job at Texas because of the aforementioned arrest for a domestic violence complaint. Ultimately was not charged, but as anybody who understands the criminal justice system understands, that's not at all unusual when it comes to domestic violence situations. Was hired after a year out of coaching at Ole Miss and has been impressive in terms of getting Ole Miss elevated to a level where they're competitive for the NCAA tournament this year. But with Beard, there's just a big obstacle that people should be focusing on. And I've seen a lot of people try to brush off the domestic violence arrest, either through saying, well, he wasn't charged, so therefore you can't hold that against him, or, hey, everybody makes mistakes. I've heard that one a lot, which is a bizarre argument as far as I'm concerned. Scott, my big thing is, like, IU is at a juncture right now where they have to make the right hire. They have to make a hire that will stabilize the program, can be built around, can get positive momentum going forward. There's more to that than just being a good on-court coach. And my concern that, a lot of people's fervor around Beard is kind of ignoring all the other issues that would make this a very dangerous hire for Indiana. And, that's even assuming that you don't find a domestic violence arrest disqualifying, which I personally do in cases like this. It's one of those deals where the risk does not justify whatever reward, because the risk is almost unknowable.
Yeah, I mean, you look at all the other candidates that we've talked about that have some kind of baggage. It's just running afoul of the rules of the game, or pushing too hard, or cheating. This is a real arrest. Like you've done a real crime, which, it's funny. All the other people, you'll text me like, Wade Collins, like, here's what we're talking about next time. This is the only one that you and I have kind of pushed off because we're not quite sure how to talk about it. We've talked about at length how to do this. We have recorded this before, and imagine doing this, kind of tiptoeing around this for multiple seasons as your coach. I hear what you're saying. I agree with him. I'm not comfortable talking about it. I don't condone what happened. I don't know what happened, but it's like, this is a very serious allegation. It's a very serious crime. It's something that I don't feel comfortable talking about. Like, I don't want to be talking about this with my basketball program for years. And, we had talked before this about, like, the redemptive arc. You got to give somebody a second chance, which I agree with. But as you said, it's like he has a second chance. He's coaching in the SEC. Like, he has a job. He's coaching one of the two best conferences. It's one of those where if another story pops up at any point during his coaching tenure, it could all fall apart again. And is that really a risk you want to take, as you said, at a very important juncture? And the last thing I'll say is the connection point. I'm also tired of the connection points tonight, and it has to be somebody from we're done that. We did that with Woodson, but this connection point is so minor. Like, yes, he coached with Knight. That was when Knight was in jilted ex-girlfriend. Like, he wouldn't wear, this is the most comfortable red sweater I've worn in years. I mean, he hated IU at that point. It wasn't like he was glowingly telling Chris Beard stories about Assembly. Come sit and let me tell you about Assembly Hall and how great the Purdue ride. I mean, he hated IU when he was at Texas Tech. I'm not sure he ever got over it. And outside of that, Chris Beard is a guy who has built his bones recruiting, coaching in Texas and the Southeast. If he had not coached under Bob Knight, there'd be no point where you'd be like, this is a real connection point to a guy who can cut it in the Midwest.
Yeah, I mean, and look, I think on the Knight front, I've got this on pretty good authority. Like, they may not be as close as perceived. I think would be the way that I would put it. So I think a lot of people misidentify that connection a little bit. I look at it like this. This is a coach who clearly can coach at a top level, but clearly has had some issues that have made him not attractive. Because look, he was at Ole Miss last year. Everybody was like, who's going to take the chance of hiring Chris Beard, and will it go off the rails? So they hire him at Ole Miss. He coaches there for a season. He's clearly very available to go somewhere else. This is not too far off from Bob Huggins, post DUI arrest the first time, getting hired at Kansas State and then trying to bounce after a year and ends up bouncing after a year to go back to West Virginia. But I'll note that last cycle, two programs that are very much culturally connected to Indiana had openings. Louisville had an opening, chose not to hire Chris Beard. He was very available at that point. They end up going with Pat Kelsey, a relatively little-known coach out of College of Charleston, instead of hiring Chris Beard. Kentucky opens up. Does Kentucky hire Chris Beard, given
a program that's more willing to play in some of these areas, it feels like, than Indiana?
Kentucky does not hire him and ends up going in entirely different directions with the person that they're trying to bring in. Arkansas had an opening. Did they go try to get Chris Beard? No. So, point being, several pedigree programs that have won national titles, decided that this was not the right move for them. So I look at Indiana, and Indiana being, I think, in a more precarious spot in some ways than maybe not Louisville, but certainly the other two programs were at the time of their hires. This just feels like an unnecessary risk for a coach that, while he's had quite an impressive run, is not, there's no national title. And, you're talking about very good, but not consistently great across both offense and defense performances. And I would even say, I'm going to call something up here, Scott, for those people who are watching on YouTube and Spotify. But if you're not watching, I'll read it off. I've got this thing up that says, it's coaching notes, and it's a blind resume comparison between two coaches. Coach A, I'll just give it away, is Chris Beard. .695 winning percentage over the last 8 seasons, 2 regular season titles, 6 tournament appearances, 1 Final Four, 2 Elite Eights, 4 seasons with a Ken Pom top 15 defense. Coach B, same 8 years, .753 win percentage, 3 regular season conference titles, 6 tournament appearances, a Final Four, 2 Sweet 16s, 5 seasons with a Ken Pom top 15 defense. And I'll note, this Coach B also had probably their best season as a head coach at their current institution wiped out by COVID. This was a season where this person's team was going to be a 2 seed. They were in the top 10 of Ken Pom. We never actually got to see that team perform. Coach A, as I mentioned, is Chris Beard. Coach B is not Archie Miller. I know that. Archie Miller.
Coach B is not Chris Collins.
It's not Will Wade. It's Brian Dutcher of San Diego State, the longtime assistant for Steve Fisher, who, of course, as we talked about, took his team to the national title game. They lost, pretty brutally to UConn. But
Galen's hot board is Matt Painter and Brian Dutcher.
There you go. It's like a Ty Love Midwest guys, is what I can say. But this is where I ask myself with the Beard thing. Like, everybody's like, well, let's just look at the basketball. It's like, you can't just look at the basketball, because if you just look at the basketball, his resume is pretty good, but there's other coaches that have equal or superior resumes. So that's, to me, not the reason why you point to this guy and say he's clearly the choice. Oh, well, he took a team to a Final Four. Well, who else recently has taken teams to Final Fours? I mean, Kevin Keats at North Carolina State just took his team to a Final Four. I just mentioned Brian Dutcher, who took San Diego State to the Final Four, which I would consider to be a bigger accomplishment than taking Texas Tech. Hubert Davis took his team to the title game. Mick Cronin, who we've already talked about.
Well, you reverse it. Oh, sorry.
Porter Moser, the Oklahoma coach when he was at Loyola.
You reverse engineer what you've done before, going through the top coaches right now. How many of them took a team to a Final Four before their first job? Like Nate Oates hadn't, Tommy Lloyd hadn't. I guess Tommy Lloyd still hasn't. But but you go through that list. A lot of coaches that are really good right now never took a team to a Final Four until they did it with the place they're at now.
Yeah. So look, when you get down to it, I'm going to actually call Dutcher's stats up for those people who haven't seen them, because this is not a guy who I think is a reasonable candidate. It's a shame, though, because, I mean, he's had tremendous success at San Diego State. He's had, look at all these top 10 defenses he's had. Offense hasn't been quite as good in most years, but that, you know, they had that 2020 year where they had both of them going at a top 15 rate. I'll always wonder if that team might have had a chance to win a national title in the tournament that year. So my point being, like, there are other coaches out there who have similar resumes who don't have the baggage. And even if you want, for whatever reason, to take the approach that, well, you know, whatever sins were committed were paid for, I don't think you can put aside the fact that that situation occurred. You've got a lot of industry people who are very skeptical that this guy is going to be able to sustain himself. This is just one of those hires where I don't think you can take the risk, nor should they, because there are certain things, as you mentioned, Scott, that fall beyond the level of, oh, you cheated with the recruits or this or that. This falls beyond that as far as I'm concerned. And normally we do our 0 to 100 rating on this. And it's like, I don't know that I could ever feel good about Chris Beard being hired as a head coach because of what's happened up to this point. And that's just, I don't think Indiana needs to put itself in a position where this is the direction that they go. This is both too critical a hire, and I just don't think this is a person who has demonstrated over a long enough period of time that they can keep it together under the spotlight, because that's exactly, as much as we've heard talk about fishbowl and things like that, this is not the place to go and like live out a quiet coaching life the rest of your time. It would be almost impossible to get excited about this hire, because in the back of your head, A, you just hired a guy that got arrested on a DV complaint, whether or not he was charged, and B, in the back of your head, like, this is a time bomb waiting to go off. Like, something is going to happen that is going to put Indiana basketball and the athletic department in a really bad situation.
Agree with all of that. I would also say, you know, for those who are saying just focus on the basketball, just focus on that. It's like, all right, but that's in a vacuum, because you teach media. If you were there at that first press conference, third question you asked Olson is, how did you what are your thoughts about the domestic assault charges, and how'd you put those to rest? I mean, like, it's going to be a question at the press conference. Like, it is. And, you know, the other thing that I will say is it's not, it's only been 2.5 years since that happened. It's very, very recent. It's not that it's better to happen before, but at least if it was like 15 years ago, it's like, all right, that was 15 years ago. There's been a lot of time passed. Like, we know what happened. You've demonstrated a long period of time. And again, this is just, Indiana is a program that doesn't like to play in the gray. This is, you're like you said, you're willingly putting yourself in the gray in a very important hire. And if things go wrong, or if more things come out, even if they're alleged, you're probably in a tearing it down to the studs situation again. Like this is the one that we've talked about. Every other coach we've talked about, like, whether it's, I keep joking about Chris Collins, but, you know, Chris Collins or any of these other guys, there's a bad scenario where it ends up being like Archie again. It's like, hey, man, 4 years didn't work out. This is the only one we've talked about where there really is kind of a, you know, end of Samson era possibility there. And it's like, is the reward really worth that risk?
Yeah. So that's,
yeah, I
think, you know, about all that you can say on the topic. And again, I just, from knowing what I know and who I know at IU and the way that this institution is going, a lot of the moral high ground stuff on recruiting and paying players, like, that's gone. Like, all that's, you know, that era is over. There are certain things that go well beyond that. I just think the Beard situation falls right into that category. So anyway, before we wrap up, some real quick news. There was some chatter. It was not chatter. It was actually like printed reports from the Des Moines Register that TJ Otzelberger has signed a contract extension, which a lot of people immediately jumped at and said, well, he's off the hot board. Whether or not Otzelberger is actually off the hot board or not, this signed contract extension doesn't really change anything that we talked about the last time. You know, we did get confirmation that they did drop his buyout from 20 or so million to $4 million. It actually drops to 2 if their athletic director leaves, which I don't think is going to happen. So a lot of the talk about Otzelberger was predicated on the idea that this extension had been signed.
Right.
He didn't just sign it. It just got publicly released through open records requests, which is why you're now getting this information. So it actually kind of confirms the idea that, at least from a financial perspective, Otzelberger would be a viable candidate for Indiana to go after. Whether or not he's the guy they end up hiring, don't know. But that's
having this much time, it is turning into where we're becoming like the LA of the 90s and the NFL, where everybody's just using us as leverage to get a better deal. Like if you're the coaches, you might need to come together at your next meeting, like, hey, all right, Kansas, you guys are having trouble with Self. Can you fire him in like February? It just gives us a nice 3 months to just everybody can renegotiate their contracts, and then somebody can go take that job, and we'll just UCLA. You guys are up next. Like everyone just it's like Hard Knocks. Everyone takes a shot at it. Everyone gets a 3-month period. One of the top schools, but no, it's we will hire a coach. But I think that, we almost need to bet the over under on the number of coaches that renegotiate their own deals when this is done. I mean, we're already at 2. Again, the Otzelberger thing probably happened maybe before this, but
it did. Yeah.
Just for fun, we'll have him. We have Dusty May. There might be another one. Like we're going to get 3 or 4 coaches who just get to renegotiate based on this process being so long.
This is the problem with when did something get signed versus when did something get publicly made available. And that's people.
You now with Gene Hackman.
I mean, people miss this stuff all the time, or they misinterpret when news comes out and what it means. And so,
that Gene Hackman joke, but just
that was terrible. I'm not going to acknowledge that. Jeez. But that's I think important for people to keep in mind. And again, when we were talking about Otzelberger, it was with the idea that the buyout had become more reasonable. So there'll be some interesting things, I'm sure, that'll pop up. But again, like you said, Scott, it seems outside like IU's being used as leverage for all of these people. The only one we really know about it was Dusty May, because that one was signed at some point in the last couple of weeks. But even that does not look like a contract that is, I mean, it wasn't like that buyout became unreasonable. That buyout went to $7.5 million.
Well, to credit you, this is your thing too. It's like, I'm joking about the buyout. There will be other buyouts happening. That doesn't mean that the person said no to IU.
Right.
It just means that they noticed a leverageable situation and they leveraged it for themselves, which doesn't mean any of these people are saying no to IU. They're just saying yes to more money. And then possibly could also be saying yes to IU. I mean, we don't know. Yeah, no, it's just like I get money. My former institution gets money. Everybody gets money. It's great. Right. Yeah.
Anyway, all right. We'll go ahead and wrap things up, as we will have another game coming up tonight. Indiana taking on Washington. We'll be back next day or two, talk about that game, have some bracketology updates for you, and more candidates coming up. For Scott, I'm Galen. This is CrimsonCast. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. Bring back the Bison. Stay never daunted. So long, everybody.